Tonight, millions of Americans bracing for what could be a monster snowstorm. Salt trucks and plows ready to deploy along the East Coast. One Massachusetts city offering to pay up to $200 an hour for plow drivers. Alerts in effect up the I-95 corridor. Cities like Philly and New York could be digging out for more than a foot of snow. Al Roker joins Top Story again tonight. Also tonight, President Biden speaking to the leader of Ukraine after Russia issued an icy response to a diplomatic letter sent by the U.S. The Kremlin saying it is not optimistic Putin's demands will be met. Our Richard Engel inside the snowy trenches with Ukrainian troops who are now preparing for an all-out war. Supreme Court vacancy. President Biden officially announcing the retirement of Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer. So who's on the short list to fill the seat? We take a closer look at a trailblazing potential nominee who is already backed by one of the president's closest allies. Stormy versus Avenatti, the disgraced attorney cross-examining his former client, adult film star Stormy Daniels, who has accused him of stealing her book money after the two famously teamed up to take on then-President Donald Trump. The testimony taking a bizarre twist when Daniels said in court she could speak to dead people. Crash and grab, new video showing thieves ramming a stolen SUV into a jewelry store, one then using an axe to break the glass cases. And the undelivered letter from the Holocaust found at a flea market here in the States. The woman who tracked down the sender's family and delivered it 77 years later. Top Story starts right now. And good evening. We begin Top Story tonight with that nor'easter taking aim. More than 30 million Americans under winter storm watches from the Carolinas all the way to New England. East Coast cities making sure their salt trucks and snow plows are ready to go with the snow expected to begin in just over 24 hours. Franklin, Massachusetts, get this, facing a plow driver shortage, now offering up to $200 an hour to get some help. The heaviest snow expected from eastern Long Island through coastal New England, and with powerful wind gusts, the region could see blizzard conditions. Forecast models are not agreeing on snowfall totals at this hour, but cities like Boston, Philly, and New York could see about a foot of snow or more. In addition to the storm, Arctic temperatures this weekend will spill all the way down to South Florida. Let's get right to NBC's Emily Aketa, who leads us off tonight from right here in New York.
Tonight, tens of millions are under winter alerts as a storm closes in on the I-95 corridor. But are we talking a blockbuster event? Depends who you ask, as the U.S. and European forecasting models continue to wrestle over what's in store. And the difference could be a matter of inches or feet of snow.
So even though they're disagreeing to some degree on the amounts of snow, the general idea is still the same.
Saturday will pack the most powerful punch, dumping snow on major cities like Philadelphia and New York, while bringing fierce winds to coastal regions up to 60 miles an hour. New England is expected to sustain the biggest blow. Preparations there already underway.
I live alone, and if there's a storm, I don't want to be without anything to eat.
In the town of Franklin, Massachusetts, there's a call out for all snowplow drivers, offering as much as $200 an hour.
We don't have enough trucks. We get 220 plus miles of road in town, so we hire outside contractors.
Residents bracing for up to 2 feet of snow, running into the supply chain crunch at hardware stores.
I usually have a lot more than this in stock, and this year with the supply chain issue, that didn't happen.
Communities from North Carolina to Maine revving up their severe weather response teams to face a nor'easter packing snow, wind, and unpredictability.
We are getting the plows on the trucks. We're putting the salt on the back. We are gassing them up.
All right, Emily Aketa joins us now from a chilly Central Park here in New York City. So, Emily, as we count down the hours to what might be a blizzard, what should people keep in mind who are going to be sort of in the path of that storm?
Hey there, Tom. So with this weekend, more bitter cold on the way. So fire officials are urging people to check the batteries on their smoke alarms and their carbon monoxide alarms. Remember, January is the leading month for home heating fires. Plus, there's the risk of treacherous roadway conditions just here in New York. Some 1,600 snowplows at the ready. Tom?
All right, Emily Aketa leading us off tonight on Top Story with the different forecast models leading to a wide range of expected snowfall totals. Let's bring in our friend Al Roker to help bring some clarity on what we should expect. So Emily asked it there at the top of her story, is this going to be a blockbuster event?
Well, we're still waiting to see. The jury's still out in a sense, Tom, and I hate to equivocate, but we would only want to let you know what we know. We do know right now 40 million people under winter weather advisory, storm watches, winter storm warnings from the Appalachians all the way to the Carolinas up into New England. Now, Friday, here's the European model. Slower, stronger, closer to the coast, bringing heavy snow with major impacts for New England. However, the American model is faster, a little weaker, and further to the east. So that's light snow with the exception of some heavy activity along down East Maine's coast. But we do expect to see some sort of bombogenesis. That's where the storm intensifies rapidly. We expect a 30-plus millibar drop in 24 hours. That's explosive deepening of this storm. And we also know we're all going to be seeing from Atlantic City up to Portland, even inland to Albany, strong winds, the threat for coastal flooding and power outages with this system. The potential there stretches from Bangor all the way down to the Delmarva Peninsula, from scattered to even some isolated and widespread power outages out the eastern end of Massachusetts. So the storm impacts. Blizzard conditions we expect possibly across New England, but depending on the track of that storm, it could move a little further south. The impact's uncertain as you get down to Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and on into Philadelphia. Airport delays, Boston, New York for sure, Philadelphia, Washington maybe, and it's an I-95 event, so the roads from Philly up to Bangor will be a mess. I-90 from Boston to Buffalo will have some problems as well. Tom?
Okay, we know you'll stay on top of all of this. Al, thank you for that. We want to head overseas now to the growing crisis in Ukraine. A Kremlin spokesperson saying there were few reasons for optimism after the U.S. said it wouldn't give in to key Russian demand. This as President Biden spoke with Ukraine's president to reassure him that the U.S. embassy in Kiev is staying open and more help is on the way. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel reports from a frontline military position in eastern Ukraine.
This may be Russia's way of showing it didn't like the United States' written answers to Russia's demand that NATO leave Eastern Europe and bar Ukraine. New live fire drills near Ukraine, more jets into Belarus, and naval exercises in the Baltic Sea. President Biden called Ukraine's President Zelensky, who's receiving U.S. weapons. But President Biden has said repeatedly, no American troops are heading his way. On the call, President Biden pledged additional economic support. On Ukraine's front line in the east, the troops are remarkably calm, on watch, but many here seem to be following their government's line that there's no great reason for concern. We're in good spirits, and we have no problem, says Valentin. Ukraine has already been in a low-level war out here in the east for 8 years, emptying out so-called frontline ghost villages. There used to be 3,000 people here. We found 3 women, all Russian speakers. None wants Putin to invade. We live in Ukraine. We don't need Russia, says Tatiana. Yet Russia continues to mass enforce. Upwards of 120,000 troops now, and significantly more, intelligence officials say, coming next week.
NATO is trying to show a united front in support of Ukraine, but there are divisions. Germany refuses to send combat weapons, instead is sending 5,000 helmets. The mayor of Kiev expressed outrage, asking, what are they going to send next? Pillows? Tom?
Tensions are no doubt high. All right, Richard, we thank you for that. Staying with the standoff over Ukraine, while Russia's foreign minister told reporters he's hopeful for the, quote, start of a serious conversation, it's unclear what a diplomatic path forward would look like. Let's bring in NBC News political contributor Ben Rhodes. He's a former deputy national security advisor to President Obama. Ben, you were part of the team that prepped President Obama to meet President Putin. Russia wants to guarantee Ukraine won't be a part of NATO. That's a non-starter. What can Biden tell the Russians at this point to stop war?
Well, it's very difficult. And the reality is not only does Russia want a commitment that Ukraine won't join NATO, but also they want commitments that NATO will essentially pull back from other Eastern European countries, not have any NATO presence in places like Poland and the Baltics that are already members of NATO. I think what President Biden has tried to do in his diplomatic response is have a broader conversation about arms control. Can we have discussions around transparency? If NATO is doing military exercises in Eastern Europe, there might be a process by which we can notify Russia. Try to reassure Russia that NATO is in no way a hostile or offensive military force that they need to be concerned about, but rather a defensive alliance that is focused on securing the European continent. Russia has rejected that conversation and is stuck to Putin's demands that essentially NATO get out of its backyard.
Ben, at this point, does Putin even have an off-ramp? You know, peacemaker is not part of Putin's brand, if you will, right? If he does not invade, does he come off looking as weak to his own people?
Yes. I mean, part of the challenge that we faced with Putin, and I was in many hours of phone calls and meetings with Vladimir Putin through the Ukraine crisis in 2014, is that his politics back home is dependent upon him looking like a strong nationalist leader who is restoring a sense of greatness that was lost when the Soviet Union fell apart and when Russia lost control of countries like Ukraine. The economy is not good in Russia. The COVID response has been a disaster in Russia. What Putin has is this mix of nationalism and militarism. And frankly, what we've seen in Russian state media, if you watch it, is kind of people being stirred into a frenzy that Ukraine might be planning to invade Russia, or that Russia is going to resolve the historical calamity, essentially, of Ukraine and Russia being separated. He's been ginning his people up for weeks, if not months now. And even as you've had these diplomatic conversations ongoing, you've seen this steady deployment of now 120,000 Russian troops encircling Ukraine. Even in 2014, when he moved some forces into Crimea, a part of Ukraine, and some of those eastern Ukrainian regions, that was special forces. That was Russian support for separatists in those regions. We never saw anything like the deployment that he has encircling Ukraine right now.
Ben, do you think there's a dangerous domino effect here? And what I mean by this is that Putin goes into Ukraine, he tests President Biden and NATO and really the rest of the world. And then we have China looking over at Taiwan, watching all of this, saying, let's see how the Americans react to this. How do they meet this power? How do they meet this invasion? What happens to President Biden right now? I mean, because this is a very important point in his presidency.
I think that there's two ways of looking at this. I do not buy the argument that somehow if the United States was still in Afghanistan or if the United States had a greater military role in Ukraine, that would be more relevant to China's calculus on Taiwan. Because frankly, the way that we demonstrate that we're going to take that threat seriously in Taiwan and that we're focused on China is to not necessarily be entering the third decade of a war in Afghanistan or to not have a significant amount of American military involvement in the conflict in Ukraine. On the other hand, if Vladimir Putin is allowed to just roll into Ukraine, have an invasion the likes of which we haven't seen in Europe in decades, and there's not a very significant response in the form of international sanctions that impose a deep cost on Russia, then you are sending the message that you can essentially violate a nation's sovereignty, potentially topple its government without paying a cost. And so I think what we have to do is thread the needle between the United States getting involved in wars that could be incredibly calamitous and, frankly, diminish our capacity to respond to another contingency like something in Taiwan, but at the same time have a united front with our allies to show that, look, Vladimir Putin is going to suffer if he does this course of action. His economy could be cratered by sanctions. He could be overextended in Ukraine in a way that will hurt him significantly in the long run. This could, for Putin, in the short term, he may achieve a military victory in Ukraine, but in the long run, he could bring about the collapse of the Russian economy and the overextension of the Russian military there. And so President Biden has to walk this very fine line between getting overextended but also having a firm response that imposes a clear cost.
And that's the bet there for Putin, right? Whether this short-term victory, as you mentioned, is worth it versus the long-term and whether those sanctions work. Ben, great to have you on Top Story tonight. I'm sure we'll see you again. Turning now to Washington, we want to focus more now on the White House and the high court vacancy. Justice Stephen Breyer appearing at the White House alongside President Biden today after officially announcing his retirement at the end of this term. Now the process of choosing a nominee to fill his position is officially underway. NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander has more.
Tonight, President Biden honoring Justice Stephen Breyers' judicial legacy. For the president, a poignant close to a personal chapter, noting he ran the confirmation hearing when Breyer was first nominated.
This is sort of a bittersweet day for me. Justice Breyer and I go back a long way.
And now describing who he will pick to replace him.
The person I will nominate will be someone with extraordinary qualifications, character, experience, and integrity. And that person will be the first black woman ever nominated to the United States Supreme Court. It's long overdue in my view.
Thought to be atop the shortlist, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson on the powerful federal appeals court here in Washington. A 51-year-old Harvard Law graduate who was confirmed with bipartisan support just last year. And 45-year-old California Supreme Court Justice Leondra Kruger. Breyer hand-delivering his retirement letter to the president today, saying he will serve until the end of the court's term. The president's supporters hoping it's a chance for a political reset with his legislative priorities stalled. But Republicans are pushing back.
They're trying to use this to distract from what is their failed agenda. The American people are all concerned with inflation and crime and COVID.
President Biden promises to reach out to senators from both parties for advice, as well as his vice president and others, indicating he's looking for someone in the mold of Justice Breyer.
I think he's a model public servant in a time of great division in this country.
With Breyer pulling out a copy of the Constitution, pointedly talking about the challenges still confronting this country and reflecting on the American experiment.
It's that next generation and the one after that, my grandchildren and their children. They'll determine whether the experiment still works. And of course, I am an optimist, and I'm pretty sure it will.
All right, Peter joins us now from the White House. Peter, walk us through the timeline for the next month or so.
Yeah, well, we heard from the president saying that he wants to announce that selection before the end of February. At least that's his intention. And we know that the president says he's also already reviewing candidates, their backgrounds, their writings. The White House, they've been vetting the top contenders for more than a year now. So behind the scenes, this process is well underway. I would note that the president did make a point of saying that the Vice President Kamala Harris is going to be actively involved in this process. He described her as an exceptional lawyer. Of course, she served recently on the Senate Judiciary Committee, so her relationships with those on that committee could be significant. The Democrats have to keep everybody in line here to get any nominee confirmed. And also the Chief of Staff, Ron Klain, Tom, is going to play a central role. He served as a top lawyer in both the Clinton and Obama administrations and helped behind the scenes with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's process getting confirmed.
All right, Peter Alexander with that update from the White House. Peter, thank you for that. President Biden, as we just heard, re-upping a promise to nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court. Peter offered some names, but there's also another judge down south that some say could be the pick. NBC's Dasha Burns takes a look.
Tonight, the spotlight on the short list of names to replace retiring Justice Stephen Breyer. The president's promise to name a black woman starting on the campaign trail.
I'm looking forward to making sure there's a black woman on the Supreme Court to make sure we, in fact, get every representation.
Another name among the leading contenders, South Carolina District Court Judge J. Michelle Childs, who has the backing of one of the president's most influential allies, Representative James Clyburn.
My buddy Jim Clyburn, you brought me back.
Who resuscitated the president's flatlining campaign in early 2020, helping clinch a critical victory with his endorsement in the South Carolina primary. The kingmaker speaking out today on behalf of his preferred contender.
There's nobody sitting on the Supreme Court today that can tout the background, the experience, life, and profession that Michelle Childs will bring to the court. It's just that simple.
Childs could bring the most diversity of experience to the court, with a blue-collar upbringing and law degree from the University of South Carolina, not the typical Ivy League pedigree.
What could the nomination of someone like J. Michelle Childs do for the Supreme Court and for the Democratic Party? What message would it send?
J. Michelle Childs shows that this is a party that is not necessarily the party of elites.
Childs was nominated to the federal bench by President Obama in 2010.
In federal court, I would approach only cases and controversies before me.
But she could face some roadblocks. It's been more than a decade since she's been tested in front of the Senate, as she's currently awaiting confirmation for another Biden nomination. But she has recently issued decisions on major topics that the court will take up in the coming terms, including a decision to protect voting rights, striking down a rule requiring witness signatures for mail-in absentee ballots ahead of the 2020 election. Whether Childs or another contender, her story will make history.
This is just as important as the first Jewish justice appointed by President Wilson in 1916, or the first woman by President Reagan in 1981, or the first black justice by President Johnson in 1967. This is a historical moment on a par with all of those.
All right, Dasha Burns joins me now live from here at 30 Rock. So, Dasha, we know whoever Biden nominates, at least in his opinion, won't be changing up the ideological makeup of the court, right? That's what the president hopes happens. But whomever he picks will shape the court in a different way, and that's why someone like the woman you were just profiling here may shape the court that way.
That's right, Tom. Justice Breyer was, of course, among the liberal wing of the Supreme Court, and this new justice will be too. But new faces always have an impact on the overall character of the court. The experts I've been speaking with emphasize that with this nomination, the liberal wing will now be made up of 3 women, 2 of them being women of color. And as Melissa Murray put it, this will absolutely change the intellectual energy and dynamism of the court. And it'll be interesting to see, Tom, how this new justice may build coalitions, persuade her colleagues, and perhaps even sway some rulings, Tom.
It will be interesting as the list gets more and more narrow. All right, Dasha, great reporting again tonight for us here. All right, we want to turn now to the pandemic, and a lot of people have been talking about a new strain of the virus that has emerged as the Omicron wave appears to be easing. The number of new COVID cases and hospitalizations, look at that right there, it continues to drop nationwide. That's great news. The country is facing a grim new milestone, though, the U.S. nearing 900,000 lives lost to the virus. Health officials around the world also keeping a close eye on a new subvariant of Omicron. The newest strain has been found in 49 countries, including the U.S., and could possibly be more transmissible than the original Omicron. Joining us now is infectious disease physician at Boston Medical Center, Dr. Sabrina Assumu. Doctor, thanks so much for joining us tonight here on Top Story. So first things first, tell us about this new subvariant. I know it's also being called a stealth variant, which sounds really scary. So walk our viewers through this.
So first of all, what I'd like to underscore is that we're very early in the process and scientists are working very hard to get some answers. So first, I'd like to orient everyone. So Omicron, the variant, has 4 lineages, and the BA1 is the one that's responsible for the current surge that we're going through in the US, and it's making up approximately over 99% of the cases. This new one, the BA2, is making up a higher proportion of cases in places such as the UK, Denmark, or India. So when you're looking at variants, there are 3 areas that we as infectious disease and public health officials always worry about. We're like, is it going to be more transmissible? And so far, it seems that it's either going to be as transmissible as the BA1 or a little more transmissible. Is it going to cause more severe disease? And right now, it seems that in terms of disease severity, it's very similar to the BA1. And then the last thing is we worry that it may evade immunity, so meaning that our vaccines or therapeutics may not work as well. And so far, it seems that the BA2 is very similar to the BA1 that we've been seeing in the US. So it's even more important to get vaccinated and get boosted.
Doctor, can you clear something up for us? Because there's been some reporting out there, and I want to make sure we're clear here on Top Story. Can this new stealth variant, can it be detected by PCR test or take-home test, or both of them?
So first of all, the slight difference is that if you're looking at PCR testing that we do, let's say at the hospital, the usual testing, we usually we're able to sequence the virus and see if it has if it's one of the variants. So, but with this BA1, what you need to do is you need to do genomic sequencing that you can't do usually at all the different hospitals. You can detect and know if you have SARS-CoV-2, so you can diagnose COVID-19, but you can't tell which variant it is because this one is slightly different than the BA1, and it doesn't have what we call the S gene dropout, which was a very significant signature that would allow us to rapidly identify this particular variant.
Okay, Dr. Assumu, we thank you for your time tonight and for your analysis. Still ahead, the manhunt in Houston. 3 police officers shot in a residential neighborhood. The warning for residents in the area tonight. Plus, the black man found dead after an overnight trip with 4 other people, including potential co-workers, why his family has now hired their own medical expert. And Michael Avenatti cross-examining his former client, Stormy Daniels, during his own criminal trial. The shocking testimony when Daniels said she can speak to dead people, including a haunted doll. We are not joking here. Stay with us. Just getting started on Top Story. Back now with the family demanding answers after a black man was found fatally shot after an overnight trip more than a month ago. No charges or arrests have been made, even though 4 people were detained and questioned, only to be released. Now the family hiring a world-renowned pathologist to try to get to the bottom of all of this. NBC's Clay Esamwa has the latest.
A man found dead after an overnight trip with 4 other people in December. Tonight, the family demands answers and action. Peter Bernardo Spencer was a 29-year-old Jamaican immigrant. His mother says they came to the U.S. for a better life. Now she's mourning the end of his life, recalling the moment she learned of his fatal shooting.
I shouted out and I fell on my knees.
The December 12th incident happened at a Rockland Township residence during an overnight trip, including a former co-worker, according to the family lawyer. The lawyer says Spencer worked as a contractor and was dropped off at the gathering by Carmela King, his fiancée, carrying Spencer's unborn child. The fatal shooting happened around 2:30 a.m., according to police, who say Spencer was found dead in the front yard. 1 suspect and 3 individuals were detained and questioned, but released. An autopsy was completed on December 14th, and no arrests or charges have been made, according to police.
We know how many times he was hit. It was 9 times. There may be as many as 7 shots to the back.
Police have not confirmed how many times he was hit, but say multiple firearms, ballistic evidence, and controlled substances were seized from the scene.
I worked on JFK, RFK, MLK, O.J. Simpson. This remains among the most puzzling as to what in the hell took place.
The family hired their own medical expert, world-renowned Dr. Cyril Wett, to examine Spencer.
The delay is being caused by the DA and or the police. This is not acceptable.
What additional information do you need, given that you've already examined the body?
I need the original autopsy report, and I need the photographs taken of the body at the autopsy.
According to the family, the coroner has not released autopsy photos to their medical examiner.
Sharing autopsy photos with a medical examiner is not a controversial thing. They have made controversial decision after controversial decision, and it leaves us with no other option but to assume the worst,
leaving the family with more questions than answers.
I just want to know why. That's really all I want to find out at this point.
The Venango County coroner did not immediately respond for comment. The identities of the 4 individuals originally detained and questioned have not been released. The family alleges they were all white. In a statement, the DA said, in part, quote, "The office also takes seriously any possibility that a crime may be fueled by hatred toward a person because of their race." All this, Spencer's family holds on to his memory.
He said, "I love you, Mom." He never left the phone, off his phone, without saying, "I love you. Come and give me a hug." He never just said Mom, he said Madre.
All right, we're hearing from the family there at the end of the story. Clay, as you mentioned, the family is still waiting for more information. There's a lot of questions surrounding this case so far. What are they hoping happens with these potential lawsuits?
Yeah, Tom, so I asked the family if they plan to sue. Their lawyer did not go into specifics, but did say that they're at the initial stage of the investigation and a lawsuit is likely to come. Meanwhile, the police in a report urged the public to, quote, remain patient. The county DA even said the ongoing investigation could take 4 to 6 weeks prior to making a charging decision. So really, this is something we're going to have to track and see, Tom.
Okay, Clay, we thank you for that. Back in New York, adult film star Stormy Daniels taking the stand in the criminal trial against her former lawyer, Michael Avenatti, today telling the jury that Avenatti stole her money from a book deal and lied to her about it. But the real fireworks coming when Avenatti, who was representing himself, we should mention, cross-examined her. Tom Winter has more.
Tonight, Michael Avenatti and film actress Stormy Daniels going head-to-head in court.
As I learned a long time ago, to thy own self be true.
Prosecutors accusing Avenatti of stealing nearly $300,000 in book advances from Daniels, representing himself, cross-examining his former client.
Do you still think she's an American hero?
The attorney trying to undermine Daniels, getting her to admit that in the past she has said she could speak to the dead and that she has conversations with a haunted doll named Susan, who has her own Instagram account. The two had famously teamed up in 2018 to take on then-President Donald Trump. They immediately made headlines.
Ultimately, the American people and others that are far more educated and powerful than us will decide whether the president is fit to remain in office.
Daniels hiring Avenatti to get her out of a non-disclosure agreement, preventing her from talking about an affair she says she had with Trump, an affair Trump denies.
Do you think you've got the President of the United States
running scared.
He's not smart enough to run scared.
What is he?
An egotistical lunatic at this point.
It's about the deception. It's about the lies and deceit that have been told relating to this agreement and what Mr. Trump knew and when he knew it and what they've done to cover it up.
It was after Daniels wrote her autobiography, Full Disclosure, that the relationship soured. When questioned by prosecutors today, Daniels telling the jury he, quote, stole from me and lied to me. She told jurors that not only did Avenatti take her third and final payment, but he then spent it. Avenatti says he's innocent. The attorney pouncing on Cross, asking if she had any email, text, or recording stating that he wouldn't take any money from the book deal. Daniels replied, no. An unconventional case that may have another twist when Avenatti begins his defense.
Have you decided if you'll take the stand in your own defense and who will question you, or if you will question yourself?
I have not decided that. It's a decision I'll make probably over the weekend, culminating in Monday after consultation with a lot of people that I trust and respect.
Federal prosecutors are expected to rest their case as soon as Friday. If Avenatti is convicted, Tom, he could face up to 20 years in prison.
20 years in prison. All right, Tom, thank you for that. When we come back, horror unfolding in Afghanistan. The situation so dire since the Taliban control took over, some residents are selling their organs to survive. You heard me correctly. A look inside the country tonight. And crash and grab the stolen SUV plowing into a jewelry store. A thief exiting the vehicle armed with an axe. Stay with us. All right, now to Top Stories newsfeed, and we begin with the manhunt in Houston after 3 police officers were shot. Police say the suspect fired at the officers in broad daylight during a police chase through a residential neighborhood. Residents asked to stay inside, and nearby daycares were placed on lockdown. The 3 officers were taken to the hospital, but all are expected to survive. That's great news. A 25-year-old is facing several charges after dragging a police officer for 5 blocks with his car. Surveillance video shows an SUV crashing into several parked cars in Philly. The officer hanging out of that SUV after the driver attempted to flee a traffic stop. The officer suffered minor injuries, is expected to be okay. And the search tonight for the suspects wanted in a smash and grab robbery near San Diego. Take a look at this. Surveillance video shows a stolen SUV plowing into the jewelry store. You saw it there. Masked men, one using an axe, then broke display cases inside. They stole an undisclosed amount of jewelry and cash before fleeing. And there is outrage tonight after a Tennessee school board banned the Pulitzer Prize-winning graphic novel Mouse. The book, published by cartoonist Art Spiegelman, is based on his parents' experience in Nazi Germany and concentration camps. The McMinn County Board removed it from an 8th grade curriculum, citing some profanity and one image of a nude woman who was Spiegelman's mother. He spoke to CNBC and called the vote, quote, Orwellian. Ben Roethlisberger is retiring after 18 seasons with the Pittsburgh Steelers. The 39-year-old quarterback announcing his decision with a video on social media. Drafted by the Steelers 11th overall in 2004, he's finishing his career with 2 Super Bowl wins and the 5th most passing yards in NFL history. What consumers and investors need to know from the business world and beyond. The Commerce Department reporting that the U.S. economy grew 5.7% in 2021, the fastest pace since 1984. The data showing that growth accelerated even faster in the final quarter of the year. CNBC's Morgan Brennan, co-anchor of Squawk on the Street, joins us now. So, Morgan, my first question to you is, and I'm really glad you're on tonight to explain this. We get all these mixed signs from the economy, right? Record high inflation, the market's all over the place. And now we have this somewhat of good news for the economy. Break this down for our viewers.
All right. So, yeah, it is good news. It's actually better than expected versus what economists were anticipating for this first initial reading on GDP, not only for the final 3 months of 2021, but also for the full year. This is a very strong rate of growth. It's actually the strongest rate of economic growth for the year of 2021 that we've seen in nearly 4 decades. But you have to put it in context as well, because it is basically coming after a year of recession in 2020, when the pandemic and all of those subsequent lockdowns caused the economy to shrink and shrink significantly. So 2021, still a year of fits and starts. We had different variants of coronavirus that we were navigating, labor shortages, supply chain challenges, but it was very much a year of recovery. You saw consumers spending more, and just as importantly, in those final 3 months of the year, you did see businesses moving to stock up on inventories after all the shortages that they were affected by as the year went on. The one other thing I would note here, Tom, is that the rate of growth is expected to moderate this year. So economists right now are expecting to see a growth rate for GDP that's going to be closer to 4% for 2022 as the world hopefully gets closer to normal and hopefully keeps coronavirus at bay. That's as federal stimulus goes away and as the Federal Reserve potentially moves to raise interest rates to counter inflation.
I'm curious, you mentioned at the top of your remarks how big of a number this was. It surprised some. Did inflation play a role for that? Did it fuel part of that?
It absolutely did. So if you've got the highest read for GDP in nearly 40 years, we've also have the highest rate of inflation in about 40 years as well. That did absolutely help fuel this higher GDP reading. And if you actually adjust for inflation, this is particularly true in the final quarter of 2021, the economy grew actually much more slowly, just under but very close to those pre-pandemic levels. And I think this matters because consumers are feeling the pinch in their pocketbook. Higher prices for everything from autos to rents to food to gasoline. And even as we are seeing this strong data, you do have some Americans, and this is based on some recent polls we've seen, not feeling so upbeat about the economy, despite the fact that we are seeing this really strong economic data.
All right, we thank you and CNBC for all of that. Turning now to the Americas, a look at the stories coming out of the U.S. and across Latin America. Tonight, the Coast Guard calling off the search for survivors in that horrific boat accident off the coast of Florida. 4 more bodies were found, bringing the death toll to at least 5, but 34 people are still missing. The mother of the lone survivor now speaking out. NBC's Blaine Alexander has the details.
Tonight, the desperate search for survivors from a capsized boat off the coast of Florida has been suspended.
Unfortunately, we've come to the most difficult time in any search and rescue case, and that is the point at which we decide when to cease actively searching.
The Coast Guard says the boat, headed to Florida from the Bahamas, was likely a human smuggling venture. 34 people are still missing, 5 confirmed dead. Officials say their nationalities are unknown. The only known survivor, this 22-year-old man, found clinging to the capsized boat. He managed to survive in open sea until rescue crews reached him Tuesday morning. His mother says he was making the journey with his 18-year-old sister. Her daughter, she says, is among the missing.
Le digo yo, dime de tu hermana, por favor, dime de tu hermana, ¿dónde está? ¿Dónde la busco? Dime de mi hija. Y me dijo, mamá, mi hermana murió. Mi hermana se ahogó. Yo no sé, mamá, yo la busqué lo que pude, no la pude encontrar. Yo la llamaba y mi hermana no aguantó.
According to the Coast Guard, the survivor says none of the passengers wore a life jacket.
We do suspect that that this is a case of human smuggling. This event occurred in a normal route for human smuggling from the Bahamas into the southeast U.S.
For decades, countless migrants have risked everything trying to reach the United States by sea. Last spring, 3 people died and dozens were hospitalized when their boat broke apart off the coast of San Diego. Officials believe another case of human smuggling. And Coast Guard numbers show in just the last 3 months of 2021, nearly 600 Cuban migrants attempted the dangerous trek to the U.S. by sea, a number far outpacing the previous year. Tonight, the lone survivor remains in a hospital under immigration custody. His mother is pleading for mercy.
Que comprendan esta situación, que él dice que vivió un infierno, que por favor lo dejen libre. Lo dejen libre para yo ser el apoyo de él y él sea el apoyo mío. Y yo también necesito a mi hijo conmigo para que me dé la fuerza para seguir con esta pérdida, con este dolor.
And that was Blaine Alexander reporting for us. Now to Top Stories Global Watch. We begin with the historic inauguration in Honduras. Xiomara Castro sworn in as the country's first female president. Vice President Kamala Harris was in attendance there. You see her right there. The U.S. has strongly backed Castro, seeing her as a potential ally to fight corruption in Central America and hoping she will help tackle the root cause of mass migration out of that region. Prince Andrew is demanding a jury trial in a sex abuse lawsuit against him. In new court documents, the prince formally denied that he was a co-conspirator of convicted sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. He's also calling for a jury trial in a civil lawsuit from Virginia Giuffre. She has alleged that Prince Andrew sexually abused her at the homes of Epstein and Maxwell. And a rocket will unintentionally crash into the moon for the first time ever. A piece of SpaceX rocket launched in 2015 is set to hit the moon by March 4th. The 4 tons of metal is traveling at 5,000 miles per hour and is being sucked in by the moon's gravitational pull. Astronomers say it will make a new crater but won't damage the moon. Right, turning now to Afghanistan, where there is a humanitarian crisis unfolding. Families struggling since the Taliban took over, desperately need of food and money. And with a lack of foreign aid, residents in one city are making extreme decisions for survival. Sky News special correspondent Alex Crawford takes us inside there.
They've all sold their kidneys to survive. The organ trade isn't new in Afghanistan, but it's just got more desperate. Every single person here is hungry, and poverty is driving already poor people to even more extreme measures. This man tells us we've no choice. We've already sold our kidneys. Now we've got to sell our children. And they're suffering terribly. The Taliban takeover meant a massive cut in aid, and these are people with few options. We've taken efforts to conceal their identities for their own safety. It's a highly conservative society, but I'm allowed into a room with the women. They agree to me filming their scars, some just a few months old. The women have sold their kidneys for less than the men, around $1,500 an organ. There's a lucrative trade with many organs going to Iran, but the money's still not enough. Most of these women are still teenagers with multiple babies but few rights. And now they're being forced to sell their children so they all have a better chance of survival. No one can tell me to sell my children, but we're struggling to keep them alive, she says. And that's why we've thought of selling them. Maybe better for them, and we get food for the others. It is a tragic situation, and one they see no quick end to.
There's a lot of women there who've sold their kidneys and now thinking of the last option, which is selling their children too.
The aid is fought over. What's here is far outweighed by the huge need. It's really very hard in Afghanistan right now, she says, and there are too many people like me who don't have a husband or a father to support them. For women who aren't allowed to work under the Taliban and aren't even allowed to complain about that, it's misery on misery. She's crying, telling us her bag of flour has been stolen. I don't know what I'm going to do, she says. Foreign aid's not feeding into the country whilst politicians wrestle over dealing with a Taliban regime holding power because they're holding the guns. You can ask everyone here, they're happy, this fighter says. Security's good. A man interrupts. Yes, security's good, but we don't have any money or food. Back at the community outside Herat, where whole families have already sold their kidneys, we're with the village elder who's urgently trying to persuade this family not to sell one of their babies. I urge the world, please don't leave us alone, he says. Stop this tragedy when people are selling their children or part of their bodies. But both parents have already sold their kidneys. They've already lost a child who starved to death, and they still have 8 little mouths to feed. I've already lost one. I can't see them all lose their lives, she says. At least someone else will feed them. These are decisions no parent wants to make. But hunger can break even a mother's bond with her babies. Alex Crawford, Sky News, Herat.
And our thanks to Alex Crawford for that devastating look at Afghanistan tonight. We'll be right back. All right, back down with the countdown to the Winter Olympics. Members of Team USA boarding their flights from Los Angeles to Beijing today, now preparing for rigorous COVID protocols once they land in China. NBC's Steve Patterson was there to see them off.
Tonight, Team USA packed, pumped, and ready to compete in the Winter Olympics. Speed skating star Brittany Bowe with a final farewell to mom before a 17-hour flight.
Love you.
But with COVID complicating everything from training to qualifying, it's already been a long trek.
Dude, it's been, such a crazy ride. I'm just fingers crossed we get to get on this plane and get over there safe and sound.
This is it. Nearly half the U.S. team is boarding this flight after a lifetime of preparation. But first, they're going to have to deal with some pretty strict protocols.
Once they make it to Beijing, they'll be tested daily. They must remain in a fully closed loop, no interaction allowed with the Chinese public. And if an athlete tests positive, they'll be immediately isolated or hospitalized.
I've tried to not get so frustrated in my head and just take it day by day. So many invasive nose tests.
The Chinese government's zero COVID policy upping the stress.
It's definitely adding a nerve-wracking part to it, but still I'm just focused on racing and competing my best.
That mindset echoed by the whole team.
I think that if we just do our jobs, we're going to do amazing.
A lifelong dream, undeterred, no matter the obstacle. Steve Patterson, NBC News, Los Angeles.
We thank Steve for that. We will be rooting on all those Olympians. When we come back, a priceless artifact found at a flea market. It's an undelivered letter written by a Holocaust survivor in 1945. The New York City decorator now making sure it was delivered to the sender's family nearly 8 decades later. Stay with us. Finally tonight on this International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we want to share the story of a letter penned by a Holocaust survivor back in 1945. That letter was lost for over 75 years until a New York City decorator found it. On many weekends, interior decorator Chelsea Brown can be found visiting New York City's flea markets, combing the aisles for the perfect vintage find. Over the years, she's found treasures and built sources. That's how she heard about a priceless historical artifact that might go to auction.
A vendor that I know from one of the flea markets I go to, he mentioned that he had collected Holocaust documentation from 30 years ago. And he said he was going to sell it for thousands of dollars.
That document? A handwritten letter sent from Berlin by Holocaust survivor Isla Lowenberg to her sister Carla. Lowenberg writes, "No one is alive anymore. My pain is unspeakably big." Another document included with the letter revealed Isla's harrowing story, jumping out of a moving train on the way to Auschwitz and escaping back to Berlin. Determined to deliver this letter to the family, Chelsea got to work.
Over the next few weeks, I persuaded him to bring those documents in to let me see them. And then finally, I persuaded him to let me buy three documents out of all of them.
With the documents in hand, Chelsea kept digging online, learning that the sisters reunited after the war and spent the rest of their lives in New York City. After a month-long search, Chelsea got in touch with Isla's niece, Jill Butler.
Well, first of all, Jill thought I was scamming her. She was like, this person is just looking for money. But we had a 2-hour phone call that day. And once I persuaded her I was a real person and I was actually going to return these documents, we both were just over the moon, so overjoyed.
The family telling us in a statement what it means to get that letter back. Quote, "We all loved our great Aunt Isla and are thrilled beyond words to read her thoughts in her own handwriting after she emerged from the depths of the European inferno." While this letter is finally heading home, Chelsea says she's just getting started.
I return heirlooms quite frequently, and one of my main missions has been to return more Holocaust documentation because of how people profit off of them. My main goal is to get these off of the market and to their rightful families.
And I can guarantee that's not the last we've heard from Chelsea Brown. We also want to thank the Lowenberg family for sharing that very sensitive story. We thank you for watching Top Story tonight. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. I'll see you right here tomorrow.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.